My name is John Pasfield, and the title of this reading will be Glenn Gould, Video 2, The Phone Calls 1. This is my novel, Glenn Gould, Light and Dark. So here's the cover, Glenn Gould, Light and Dark, a picture of Glenn Gould with his hands becoming the piano keys, a novel by John Pasfield. Here's the summary on the back cover. Glenn Gould's life as a musician becomes a fairy tale. As his very first recording, the Goldberg Variations, skyrockets the young Canadian to the top of the music world as a must-see and must-hear concert pianist with sold-out performances all around the world. And then, at the height of his powers and his popularity, he makes a decision about his music and his life which splits the music world right down the middle and remains controversial to this day. So, there's 7 phone calls in the novel. In each of the main the main character phones an unnamed acquaintance and presents an image. An image is an item of information which, because it is on a seemingly unrelated topic to the life of Glenn Gould, invites interpretation. So if an image doesn't seem to relate to Glenn Gould's life, one has to do some thinking, one has to do some interpreting. The connection is not obvious. In this video reading, I'll read 2 of the 7 phone call images. So in chapter 2, page 18, we have the movie theater as an image. Let's find it here. Okay, here it is. Now, in those days, nothing digital, so Glenn Gould would have a Rolodex, which is simply a series of cards that would flip over, a little plastic holder maybe, or fancier holder. And he would flip them over, and he'd find a name and a phone number of an acquaintance, and then he would dial that number and talk to that person. All he really needed was for someone to listen to him. Glenn Gould had his own time frame, I suppose you'd say. He'd work through the night, so he wouldn't necessarily even know what time it was. Or if he did, if it was 2 a.m., excuse me, that would be a normal time to him. And he wouldn't necessarily know or worry about the time zone of the person to whom he was phoning, but he just needed to talk. And if you cared to have Glenn Gould keep phoning you, you wouldn't complain that it was the middle of the night or that you were busy working on a project. You would simply listen. So here's Glenn Gould phoning someone and talking. A phone call to a friend. So, what do you think of this as a tentative scenario? People are sitting in a movie theater. Let's say it's a Saturday afternoon, winter perhaps, so there's not much to do outside. And it's one of those corny, old-fashioned movies. The new movies don't come to the small towns. When the city gets tired of a movie, they pass it on. Anyway, it's a movie about a spaceship which is landing in a small town. It's sitting and throbbing in a farmer's field way out past the high school football field. And everybody crowds around it, trampling the stubble on the ground, keeping a distance so they can run. And then a door opens in the side of this celestial contrivance. Now, this is the interesting thing. Not only does a ramp come down in the field where the spaceship lands, but it extends right into the theater where the people are watching. And these people stand up right away, jump right up out of those theater seats, and many back away, and some just stand. But one young boy, the theater usher, moves forward and puts his foot on the glowing ramp. "Greetings from Earth," the boy calls out. "If I understand you truly, you wish an Earthling to return with you to your planet. Let me be the one to do so. I would welcome a friendly exchange. I shall enter your celestial contrivance, but on one condition only, that you will allow me to return whenever I please." Well, that's an image, and if you were phoned, you might say, "Gee, Glenn, that's an interesting story, an interesting image, but I can't wait for your explanation of what it means to you. Well, sorry, Glenn doesn't explain. He simply presents the image and leaves it at that. Okay, let's go to chapter 4. The shepherd boy is on page 34. So we're jumping from page 18 to page 34. So there's a lot of other images in between. Now, images comment on images. Images illuminate images. They also, unfortunately, I guess for we humans, obscure other images. They get in the way. So Glenn Gould phones another person on a different night, I assume. A phone call to a friend. Let's say there's a shepherd boy back in biblical times, or it could be anywhere primitive even today. And he's looking after his sheep, and he takes a drink of water and realizes that his flask, a goatskin with a stopper in it, I suppose, slung on a string of leather around his neck, is just about dry. So he drives his sheep, perhaps 15 or so adult, and with some lambs, if this is the spring, over to another field where there's a well. And he drops the bucket down, made of wood with metal bands, and draws up a nice, cool, soothing draft of spring-fed water. But as he lets it flow over his chin and down his tunic, the day is hot, I assume, he leans back a bit too far and falls down into the well. Now, what is he going to do? He can hear his sheep bleating. They wonder where he's gone. And the boy spends many hours inside the well, standing in water up to his knees. But then he finally hears some voices. Must be the other shepherds, his father and his uncle and the other men. So he sings the song of danger, taught by his mother when he was a boy. His voice acquires an echo from the well. The men all crowd around, blocking out the light, and look down at him. "Please get me out of here," he cries. "I fell down into the well and cannot get out." Again the sound reverberates. "Stay down there," his father shouts. His voice, too, has an echo. "But I will die if I stay here," the boy shouts back. "A reasonable price to pay," the father shouts in return. "All the men and I agree. Your singing is to die for. You sing the danger song as no one else. We have never heard a voice with a keener sound." Well, that's the second one. The first was the movie theater as an image. The second one was the shepherd boy as an image. Okay, here's a note that I wrote for this video presentation. When I read the biographies of the musician Glenn Gould, it struck me that he was in the habit of making late-night phone calls to a number of people. During these phone calls, Glenn Gould would do most of the talking, probably all of the talking, really. What he wanted was an audience for his thoughts. Apparently, what he would talk about was what interested him, a combination of what interested him at the time and what interested him over a lifetime. So small questions, big questions, I suppose. He would play a composition on which he was working. He would read a passage from a book which he was currently reading. He would read from an essay that he was writing, and so on. Well, serious literature is created by combining a surface story, here, the life of a musician, and deepening imagery which invites both the main character and the reader to speculate as to the meaning of the life of the main character. So, I thought that this would be an interesting image category for my Glenn Gould novel. At first, I thought that I would write, in my own words, similar things to what the historical Glenn Gould used to talk about in his phone calls. However, when I came to write these images, it occurred to me that in each of them, Glenn Gould, the character Glenn Gould, would phone someone and present what I would call a raw or pure image. Now, a raw or pure image is an image without any interpretation. Now, an image is formed when a mind juxtaposes two pieces of information. Juxtaposes, put side by side. So in this case, the two pieces of information are, two dashes here. One, the image of a particular phone call, right? The landing of the spaceship and Shepard in the well. So the image of a particular phone call juxtaposed with, number two, the entire life of Glenn Gould as reimagined as imagery in his mind. So each of these images is measured against the 50,000 words of imagery in the rest of a novel, which is the pattern of imagery in Glenn Gould's mind, which somehow exemplifies his life. In other words, the particular phone call is being juxtaposed with all the other imagery in this Glenn Gould novel, in Glenn Gould's mind. So who then is being asked to interpret this imagery? Well, the person receiving the phone call, of course, but Glenn Gould might not even think of the image as pertinent to that person. So, number one, Glenn Gould is interpreting the imagery for himself. And number two, the reader is looking over Glenn Gould's shoulder and interpreting this imagery for himself or herself. And no one will ever know whether the two, Glenn Gould and the reader, agree. So, this is my novel, Glenn Gould, Light and Dark, a novel by John Passfield. It's found on Amazon. There's more information there. It's found at my publisher's website, rocksmillspress.com, rocksmillspress.com. At my website, johnpassfield.ca, johnpassfield.ca. There's more information in the form of 2 free books. The Planning Notebook. I keep records as I plan and write a novel right up to the point where I have a complete rough draft, that is every word in place. Then I write a journal. The journal is what I think of as I'm polishing the rough draft for a month or 6 weeks. So that includes topics galore. I suppose Glenn Gould himself, music, connection between music and literature, the prose novel, the poetic novel, and so on. All kinds of topics if you're interested. So have a look at the Planning Notebook or the journal at johnpassfield.ca. And lastly, I'll say thank you for watching this video.